If the box office was the only measure of success, the 80s would look like a graveyard for the fantasy genre. But these movies simply refused to stay buried. They died in theaters only to be resurrected on home video and cable, turning financial ruin into a cult classic. Back in 1983, studios were clearly hoping audiences still wanted more space operas, especially with Return of the Jedi dominating the box office. That was the moment producer Ron Silverman pushed ahead with Krull, which became one of the more expensive sci-fi fantasy productions of its time. We still don't know the exact cost, but estimates put the budget anywhere from $30 to $50 million. The studio used that money to build 23 massive sets to tell the story of a hero named Colwyn trying to save his homeworld from a galactic entity called the Beast. The critics definitely didn't hold back. They called it a blatantly derivative hodgepodge of Excalibur meets Star Wars. One reviewer even labeled the film a hot, hollow wind that just frustrated the people who actually went to see it. The movie failed to find an audience and finished its run with just $16.5 million. So, Krull was a total disaster in theaters, but it still managed to pick up a solid cult following over the years. Fans eventually appreciated that it was an unpretentious adventure with a great cast. A major factor in its survival, which is a common theme for the movies on this list, was the rise of home video and cable channels. But of course, that is likely cold comfort for the producers who lost a fortune on the whole venture. Richard Donner directed Ladyhawke right before he struck gold with Lethal Weapon, and he even brought in the same cinematographer who shot Apocalypse Now. The story follows a young thief called Philippe the Mouse, played by Matthew Broderick, who gets caught up in a bizarre romance involving two cursed lovers, played by Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. Because of an evil spell, the woman turns into a hawk during the day and the man becomes a wolf at night. This means they are never actually human at the same time and can never truly be together. But nothing saved the film from a month that was killing off one new release after another. April 1985 was a rough period where even Richard Gere's King David and the horror flick Cat's Eye couldn't get people into theaters. It feels like the studio simply couldn't find a way to sell Ladyhawke's concept. To make matters worse, not everyone appreciated the electronic score. Many people felt it was a jarring soundtrack that didn't belong in a medieval setting. It all ended with only $18 million at the box office. For a $20 million project, that was a pretty disappointing return. To be fair, Ladyhawke was not treated like a total disaster by critics. They were mostly kind to the film's core idea and its visual appeal, and I can only add that if you watch it now, it's still a genuinely fun experience. It's Ridley Scott. It's young Tom Cruise. And yet, Legend was a total flop. Only $15 million against a $25 million budget. Ridley Scott envisioned the film as a postmodern fairy tale, but the production turned into a total nightmare. At one point, one of the film's major sets literally burned down during production. Between the fire and constant tinkering from the executives, the movie drifted further and further away from Scott's original vision. By the time it finally hit theaters, critics savaged it, and audiences mostly stayed away. And the cherry on top, Legend was seen as the movie that killed off giant fantasy epics for nearly 2 decades. But why did the film survive? For one, it contains every necessary fairy tale ingredient: a beautiful princess, unicorns, a handsome hero, dwarves, goblins, and a hideous villain. That villain is none other than the Lord of Darkness, played by Tim Curry, which we can definitely count as the film's second major strength. Darkness wants to create eternal night by destroying the last remaining unicorns. To do this, he has to capture the beautiful Princess Lily, played by Mia Sara, and only Jack, played by Cruise, and a group of brave dwarves stand in his way. Sure, it is not Blade Runner, but Legend is still a great grim fantasy in its own way. And it is still pure Ridley Scott in terms of visual imagination and sheer talent for epic cinema. Next is a film that didn't just flop, it almost ended a director's career. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen was meant to be Terry Gilliam's next big move after Brazil. However, the production was a disaster from day one. It was improperly planned, and schedules and budgets quickly flew out the window. The cost skyrocketed from an original $23 million to over $46 million. Then, a regime change at Columbia Pictures led the studio to effectively dump the movie and forget it ever existed. It pulled in a measly $8 million, saddling Gilliam with a reputation as a wasteful filmmaker that he's been fighting ever since. Despite the financial disaster, the film itself is marvelous. Many consider it Gilliam's best. While the opening minutes can feel like a chaotic assault on the senses, the movie turns into a true feast of arresting images once the journey begins. You get everything: a trip to the moon, adventures inside a giant fish, and even a visit to the bowels of the earth. It also features incredible performances, including a young Sarah Polley and a brilliant improvisational turn by Robin Williams as the King of the Moon. It's the kind of movie dreams are made of, and it's a must-watch for anyone who loves pure fantasy. Directed by Jim Henson and produced by George Lucas, Labyrinth has a pretty unique setup. Almost every character you see on screen is a puppet, except for the two leads. It stars David Bowie as the Goblin King and a 16-year-old Jennifer Connelly in her first big role as Sarah, a girl who has to find her way through a giant maze to save her baby brother. Even with its whimsical tone and a legendary lead, Labyrinth only grossed $13 million worldwide against a $25 million budget. The movie also came under fire for its depictions of violence and sexuality. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune was particularly brutal, suggesting that the sight of a baby in peril is one of the sleaziest gimmicks a film can employ to gain our attention, but Henson does it. The leads didn't escape the harsh reviews either. Critics slammed Jennifer Connelly, calling her a bland and minimally talented actress with a squeaky voice that grated on the audience. As for David Bowie, some found his performance plastic, claiming he simply pranced around his lair while staring solemnly into the camera rather than actually acting. Whether you agree or not, Labyrinth is now widely seen as a dark fantasy classic. Over time, home video helped give it a second life, and Brian Henson later said his father would have been thrilled to know the film had grown into a bona fide cult classic. In 1981, Disney tried to jump on the sword and sorcery trend with Dragonslayer, but it was far from a typical family fairy tale. Directed by Matthew Robbins, the film went for a gritty, Dark Ages aesthetic that feels much more like Excalibur than a standard Disney release. It is surprisingly grim, focusing on a village forced into a lottery where young virgins are sacrificed to keep a dragon at bay. The legendary Ralph Richardson plays the sorcerer Ulrich, and he really helps build the mystery by describing the dragon long before it appears. When the creature finally does show up, the special effects are the real highlight. The film takes a less is more approach, keeping the beast hidden for much of the runtime, and the technical work still holds up remarkably well. But when it came to the box office, the film did not live up to expectations, bringing in just over $14 million against an $18 million budget. That did not really hurt its reputation in the long run, though. It is still a cult fantasy favorite and one of the standout darker entries in the sword and sorcery wave. I'm guessing you love Highlander just as much as I do, and if not, I'll see you in the comments. Like everything else on this list, it was a total train wreck at the box office, making around $13 million on a $19 million budget. Still, Highlander is an outlier. It simply refused to die. It's the flop that somehow spawned TV shows and 4 sequels, which, by the way, also failed at the box office. Now there's a Henry Cavill reboot in the works, but we'll just have to wait and see if it can finally break the cycle and actually turn a profit this time. If this is your first time hearing about Highlander, I am genuinely jealous. It is such a wild ride. The story centers on Connor MacLeod, a guy from the Scottish Highlands who's been around since the 16th century and is still going strong in the 80s. The film cuts between his 2 lives, revealing that he's an immortal destined to battle others like him across the ages. It all comes down to one iconic rule. There can only be one. You have got a legendary soundtrack by Queen, gorgeous Scottish landscapes, and sword fights that still do the job. And even if the rules are a little undercooked, they are easy to understand and even easier to love. One quick tip if you're watching this for the first time or planning a rewatch: avoid the US theatrical cut. It's 8 minutes shorter and skips a key scene where Connor saves a young Rachel, his future adopted daughter and assistant, from a Nazi in World War II. It's essential for their bond, and let's be honest, watching an immortal Scotsman take down a Nazi is always a win.